Welcome to Constructing the Carolinas, a show where we explore the growth of our communities, cities, and counties across North Carolina and figure out what's on the horizon. We are brought to you by Barnhill, which has been constructing the Carolinas since 1949. I'm your host, Valerie Bono, Director of Business Development. Today, we welcome Kimarie Ankenbrand, Raleigh-Durham Market Lead at JLL, a global Fortune 200 commercial real estate and investment management firm with over 100,000 employees. Since the pandemic, the commercial real estate conversation has been loud and at times pessimistic. So I wanted to bring Kimarie on to get her perspective. She's no stranger to the challenges as, fun fact, Kimarie was a Division I scholarship athlete swimming long distance at Texas A&M. She's been with JLL for 19 years now and has seen the company and industry as a whole evolve. So to start, I was wondering what Kimarie and JLL are focused on right now.
The business has been very successful over many years before we got to where we are today. The pandemic has obviously taught us a lot. I know we'll get into that a little bit more as we dive into the conversation. But I think we've really taken the mindset, and I heard it during a leadership opportunity program that I was part of probably 10 years ago. And it's the mindset of what got you here won't get you to the next level. And so I think the current environment that we're in, even over the past couple of years, has caused every successful business to say, okay, we've done great. The economy's been humming over the past 12 plus years, but the world's changed. And so what do we need to do as a business to innovate and transform moving forward so we can be the best that we can be for our clients and our people? And then ultimately make sure that we're future-proofing the business for years to come. So in general, I think that's the common theme. One thing that I'm super excited about that I've had my hands in with a number of peers across the country is how are we transforming the business by growing our female talent at a quicker pace. And commercial real estate hasn't traditionally been known for being a super diverse industry, but it's changing and there's progress that has been made. But we're excited about accelerating that progress and ultimately putting a system-wide strategy in place to grow our female talent and grow our leadership landscape as well, because we really feel like that's going to allow us to think differently, bring new ideas and approaches to the table, which again is ultimately what our clients want. But we've got to put some discipline and work around doing that. We've got some goals that we've set. We've organized a group nationally that took us a few years to get together, but we've been formally in place for the past 12 months. We have senior leadership support up and down the organization. This year is the year of action. We've done a lot of talking about what we want to do. And so we've got some great things planned. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the initiative looks like it's female focus, but it's really how do we make the business better? How do we fit it into the business priorities and make sure that it's business driven, not necessarily HR or DEI driven? We need their support to help execute on the ideas, but really making it a business imperative under the lens of how do we innovate and transform the business for all. So more to come on that, but super excited. We've made a lot of progress recently and excited to see where we go in 2024 with it.
I'm excited to see where you're going too. We'll have to have you back on to hear an update in 2025.
For sure.
Yeah, that's
happy
great.
to do that.
I'm curious, you mentioned, there's an initiative, a change and shift in having female leaders at JLL. Are you also seeing that on the client side, that there are more females on the client end as well?
For sure. They might not be the top decision maker, but they're in the room as stakeholders, and maybe they are. And so that is part of it as well. We started the conversation on diversifying the business years ago around, well, you need to look like your clients. And I think we've changed the conversation of it's not look like them. That doesn't help produce really any wildly new ideas. It's really how are we thinking differently? And so when we've got clients that have a more diverse slate of what they're bringing to the table, we need to make sure that we are putting a team together that can facilitate innovative and creative ideas. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're a professional services firm. We are not producing a widget. We are producing ideas. And so we firmly believe that the way that you bring the most innovative ideas to the table is if you have the most robust landscape of like lived experiences. And part of that is gender diversity. And there's there's many other areas that you can bring diverse thought to the table. But yes, long story short, our clients, decision makers and constituents and their clients and their audience is diversifying. So again, we need to meet them where they're at and do the same.
I love that. All right. So you mentioned a little bit about the pandemic, right? So let's talk about the shift in markets. And right now you hear it everywhere. Okay, there's a push to get back to work. There's a push to return back to the office. Let's back up and say, okay, how did the COVID-19 pandemic play its part in that shift, right? There was the work from home, but then what are you seeing today with the needs coming back to work? I mean, that's a buzzword, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we found is there were probably underlying things that needed to be addressed before the pandemic. But because the economy was on such a great run and commercial real estate in general was on a great run, that there were probably some things that just weren't bubbling up. And then when the pandemic happened, a lot of things in life bubbled up and came to the surface. And I think some of those areas around the workplace is, how are you producing an experience for your employees to allow them to do their best work, to collaborate differently, to innovate differently? I think that was accelerated through the pandemic. Obviously, the idea of flexibility, and that means different things for different organizations, that was accelerated. I think ultimately organizations had to look at real estate through more of a talent lens. And again, that all came through the pandemic. I think those things were all there pre-2020, but they've just been accelerated. And so I think there's a bigger emphasis on not really the employee experience, but like what is the human experience now that we are offering to employees at any organization that you're part of. So I think that's where we've seen trends just accelerate. And now I think that's the big focus of all companies is what's the human experience? And that means a lot of different things, if you will.
Sure. So are there any trends that you're seeing as people are having these conversations about bringing on the human experience, right? Some companies, we're seeing it in tech, right? They're making a stance, okay, we need X amount of employees back to work.
Yep.
What are some of the conversations that you're seeing and trends that are coming up in those conversations around human experiences and coming back to work?
Yeah, it's an evolving conversation for sure. We've been down a few paths since early 2020, but I think what we're seeing where companies are today, and this really comes back to leadership. Our workplace strategist in the Carolinas said it best is we don't really have a workplace challenge. It's more of like it's a leadership challenge. And I think what we're seeing is as companies are communicating their workplace policy or expectations to their employees and their staff and their team, the adherence to workplace policy and expectations is still what's bouncing around out there. So I think the challenge that all leaders have, including myself as an office lead, is how do you effectively communicate the why that you want to bring your teams together, whether that be in person 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever your remit is for your company. That's the biggest trend right now, because we can talk about building beautiful spaces and amenities galore inside a space, outside the space, within a project. But I think the work to be done right now is how are organizations and leaders effectively communicating why they want people back. And the two sides of that right now are, on one hand, we want to honor employees the way they work, their need for flexibility. Maybe their views have changed on what success in life looks like and all those things. On the other hand, an organization and leaders like myself are tasked with running a business and producing results, especially if you're a public company. You've got shareholders and a stock price and Wall Street to kind of answer to. But even if you're a private company, you've got stakeholders and investors that expect results. So I think we're trying to find that balance between an organization needs to run a business and be profitable, and not just this year and next year, but for years to come. And how do you do that while also honoring employees' needs and wants for flexibility and more autonomy on their work? So that's the biggest theme that we're seeing right now in conjunction with, amenities and workplace strategy. But it's really a leadership conversation on how can you communicate the why effectively so you are building trust, transparency, and engagement with your team.
Sure. That's really interesting. And you talk about amenities. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, because I'm dying to know, what are some of the wildest amenities you've been seeing? I mean, I've heard of like dog spas, right? People want to bring their pets to the office. What are you seeing?
Trying to think of any wild things that I've seen outside the box. We've seen a project locally in Raleigh that's really trying to up their game. They took a vintage project and did a lot of renovations to it. I think they were putting like a massage room in there, and so they were going to have a masseuse. I had not seen that before. But I think in general, people are clamoring for outdoor space, rooftop amenities, activated courtyards. So not just outdoor space with a picnic table, but like really activated outdoor space, especially living in North Carolina. And food. Food sells real estate these days, and office space, I would say. People like to eat, and they want different options, and they want different price points and different type of cuisine. So we kid some of the partners that we work with on some of these mixed-use developments that, hey, the retail's selling the office space these days, so no pressure. But it's really food and beverage and outdoor space that we're seeing drive the amenity conversation a lot. Sure. Less about things like a beer tap and a ping pong table. It's activated spaces that bring joy into people's lives that they can get at home, which is, different food options and being able to be outdoors at the same time. Any
pickleball courts?
I have seen some indoor pickleball courts at the same project called The Grove.
Okay.
So they are doing that as well.
That's fun.
So have not played indoor pickleball myself, but
neither have I. That sounds like a bucket list item.
Yes. I've done it outside a few times. I'm by no means a pro, but I know it's picking up steam, not just in this market, but across the country in popularity.
Sure. So let's pivot, right? We've talked about COVID-19. Let's move forward, right? Because that's what we're all continuing to do. So how's JLL helping companies address the challenges to optimize workplace strategy specifically? And then what opportunities does JLL present to its clients for that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think early on in the pandemic, what we realized is when we were representing especially office tenants and occupiers was an architect would come on board in these projects after a lease was signed. And so you'd spend a year, 2 years in advance of that strategizing on the plan and the roadmap of where the project was going to go. But you weren't kind of bringing a design and workplace person in until after the lease was signed. And so the pandemic happened, and we realized really quickly that these conversations were now shifting to a more people workplace-centric conversation, less real estate transaction. And so what JLL did was we committed across the country to hiring workplace strategists in all our major markets. And so that was taking people from architecture and design firms and bringing them to JLL so they could come alongside of the brokerage team 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even more in advance of a project's decision-making point. Now, they do not replace architects. We still engage architects on every project on behalf of our clients. But it kind of brings forward the design and workplace conversation earlier in the process. So I think that's the biggest thing that we did and committed to 3 or 4 years ago. Courtney Fain's our workplace strategist for the Carolinas. She's just fantastic. Sometimes we go into pursuits and conversations with clients, and it's the Courtney show. It's the workplace strategy show, because that's what we need to be discussing with our clients on the front end before we go to the market, before we even talk about what buildings are out there. We need to dive deeper into how the organization's working today, how are their people, what are their expectations about a workplace strategy, and have that part of the roadmap years before, we're chasing a lease expiration or any type of lease transaction. So I'd say that's kind of the biggest way JLL has tackled that, and it's been wildly successful, and it's kind of brought subject matter expertise to the table alongside our brokerage team.
That's amazing. I love that. And it brings the level of expertise that is needed, right? But you're getting it up front and early.
Yes.
So it's nice that you have that talent in-house.
Yes. And then I'm not trying to be a workplace strategist, right? I kind of stay in my lane of what I'm good at. But then I know that you bring a partner in like that for certain clients, and it just makes a more well-rounded conversation on the front end. So the companies and organizations we work with can be more strategic early.
Yeah. So you mentioned talent. Talent, is that a huge initiative you're focused on right now internally?
Yeah, I would say every organization is faced with how are you recruiting and retaining talent, right? And that landscape continues to evolve and change. So obviously there's the workplace environment that you're providing for your people. But I think some of the things that JLL is midstream and addressing and focusing on, we admit we're not winning in any of the areas. We've just recognized we want to do better. And a few of them are, one of them is just skilling up our people, whether that's your leaders, your junior talent, or your mighty middle. Again, the world is changing quickly. The skills that what got you here aren't going to get you to the next level. So the one thing that we're trying to balance is the world has become very virtual and digital in nature. And so I think intuitively that means people like to fully communicate virtually and remotely and video and email. But I think what we're finding, again, because we're a professional service business, is we have to figure out how we are balancing virtual digital training with in-person training, and really giving people the ability to learn people skills, including myself. I've got to work on them. So that's a big area that we're starting to unpack is, okay, we've done a really good job on the virtual, remote, hybrid, digital training. And we've got to now kind of layer in how are we doing more in-person tactical training to support the business. Two other things that we're really focused on is that concept of feedback loop. I didn't really appreciate what that meant a couple of years ago until I was fortunate enough to engage with an executive coach who brought me through that process of feedback is a gift. And the quicker and the more you get feedback, the quicker you're going to learn. It's not easy. Feedback is hard. So we're trying to better integrate that into our business across the board, from leaders all the way down to new employees that we bring on. And so making that a two-way street, you've got to work at integrating that into your culture. Feedback doesn't just happen naturally, or if you do, a lot of it's peanut gallery noise. Yes. But how do you make it constructive on both what are you doing well, and let's do more of it, but also what are what are areas for opportunities that you want to explore and open up. So that's one thing. And then I think the last thing that we're focused on just around talent in general and growing the business is communication. We've gotten a lot of feedback, and I know all organizations have, of there's so much information flow out there and it's happening so quickly, regardless of what, organization or company you're a part of. But how do you communicate more clearly and more concisely? We recently had a leadership meeting, and our global CEO of markets got up on stage and was very vulnerable and was like, hey, we've heard the feedback, right? Like, we've got to improve our communication. We're a large organization. We're moving fast. Our clients have high expectations. But he was very honest. He said, clear and concise communication is hard. It is, right? And so I think when he said that, it made me realize, we're all kind of challenged with how do we more clearly communicate. So that's a big focus with our people right now, is how can we more concisely and clearly communicate all the good things that we're doing, the things we need to do better at. So those are kind of talent-related things, and you may or may not be surprised at any of them, but skilling up our people, making sure that we have a really robust feedback loop, and really focusing on clear and concise communication. And I think leadership and our people believe if we can do better at all of those things, we're going to have a higher probability of, recruiting and retaining the top talent for years to come.
Absolutely. I really love that, right? Scaling up your existing employees, because they're there. You can see who's put in the hard work. And so helping them grow in their career will hopefully lead them to have careers 19 years at JLL.
Yeah, I've learned more in the past 2 years, and I think I learned at my first 17 or 18, but it was really because I brought in my perspective on being open to feedback, wanting to learn new skills. And and finding people within the organization to learn from. So that's my stick now because it's helped me a lot. It hasn't been easy. There's been some, hard feedback that I have received, but it's helped me realize and have more awareness of the things that I need to do better at, not just for me personally, but for the teammates and the people that I work with.
Sure. I'm curious, JLL is a large company, obviously. How does the Raleigh, North Carolina market compare to some of the other markets as far as the need for talent? Is this area growing for you all?
Yeah, I think like any office across the country, we're going to grow with the market, right? So we've got roughly 50 to 60 teammates here in this market. We're not going to double in size anytime soon, right? We have roughly doubled in the past 5 years, but that is to really grow with how the market here locally is growing and making sure that we're adding the right skill set. So we will continue to strategically add subject matter expertise. That's the other thing we've been focused on is building out the business lines and really moving from a generalist team. And I think that's how a smaller market kind of starts, right? And as we start to grow and expand, making sure that we're bringing in subject matter experts instead of just trying to be that blanket generalist across the board. So we'll continue to add people, but yeah, finding good talent is hard, even in this market. Whether you're in New York City or Chicago, there's a lot of competition out there, not just within your industry, but different skill sets that might branch out into things that apply not just to commercial real estate. So it's on us to really make sure that we're projecting a brand and a culture and a career that people want to be part of. So we're not alone in the war on talent, if you will. And we're just trying to be the best we can and find the areas that we can continue to improve so we can have a good shot at the top talent out there.
Yeah, no, the talent war is all too real. I'm supporting some of our recruiting efforts. So if you're listening to this podcast and you are looking for a career in construction, come to Barnhill. It's great. We've got positions. But all kidding aside, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about spaces and how they've evolved. Can you talk a little bit about flexibility in lease agreements and workplace design and how you're helping clients optimize their real estate workplace strategies?
Yep. I think to put it simply, the biggest thing we're helping clients do is start early. I think the days of getting in front of a real estate decision 9 to 12 months in advance are long gone. If you're not out in front of a potential real estate decision or milestone that you need to address at least 24, sometimes 36 months in advance, depending on the size and complexity, you are going to lose leverage and you're going to lose flexibility. And so what we have found is since the pandemic, there's a lot more stakeholders that are involved in a real estate decision because, again, it's turned to a people and talent decision. So anytime you bring more stakeholders to the table, it just takes longer to get everyone's ideas on the table and narrow down the ultimate direction. Things in general just taking longer. I don't have to tell you that from the construction standpoint. Even after you choose a strategy to move forward, the time to design, perm out, and build out space is taking longer. And then to just build consensus amongst leadership teams and their constituents is taking longer. So in order to kind of achieve maximum flexibility in lease agreements and really design the space that you want to, simply put, we're telling people like you have to start earlier than you ever thought you would need to. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to transact earlier or you're going to be in the market earlier, but you're going to be more strategic on the front end on really building a clear plan moving forward that your leadership team and your people, if done right, are on board with. Because there's just so many moving parts to lease agreements these days, as well as, again, designing the space that you just have to give yourself enough time. Because our clients, or we see companies that don't, that is when all those things kind of go out the door and you're not really executing on something super strategic. You're in reactive mode and you're not able to build something super special and dynamic and maximizing the flexibility in your lease agreements at the same time.
Sure. And I'm sure that's where having in-house subject matter experts, right, who are architects, really helps advance that process too.
Bringing those different subject matter experts to the table earlier too, right? So brokerage isn't just coming to the table with clients anymore. We are coming with workplace strategy. We're bringing our capital markets teams because they're going to be very in tune with the financial viability of a landlord given where the capital markets landscape is. We bring project management early because they're going to help kind of unpack what are the risks, what are the timeline milestones that we need to be held accountable to, and how do we reduce the budget. So that's just a small sampling. We're bringing all those people early to the table. Different clients have different needs, but we're not just coming to the table anymore just with, a tenant rep broker. We'd be doing our clients a disservice if we weren't bringing those subject matter experts with us early.
Sure. How does JLL approach market research and data analysis to provide some of these insights for clients?
Yeah, so we have really doubled down on the data and the technology part of things. So one story before I answer that question, it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. We have an annual JLL conference within the U.S. And at the time, most people in the room were dressed like I am today, right? Guys had jackets on. They might have had a tie. The women had a jacket on. Like we were more formally dressed. That was just like our business. And they had a session and they started talking about data and technology, which had never really been introduced into commercial real estate. And they brought 2 guys up there from Silicon Valley who I will say was dressed a little bit more informally than the room. You can imagine tech, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, puffer vests, shorts, just way more casual than the room was. And I remember all my peers looked around, they're like, who are these? Like, where are we going with our business, right? I think one of the guys was one of the first inventors of Google Maps, like very early on and kind of building out that platform. And I'm super appreciative that JLL was forward thinking at the time because they saw that like we needed to be going down a data and technology solution road in addition to the traditional commercial real estate platform that we had. So the company has invested hundreds of millions of dollars since then on our data and technology because we said like the business has to transform, especially in the commercial real estate world. So where we stand today, our leadership will tell you we're on a journey. It's especially from a data perspective, it's input in, input out constantly, right? And technology application, something that was great 6 months ago, has to be revamped and reinvented constantly. So I think on the data side, what we're trying to do is harness and make sure that we have ownership over our data. So we're not solely reliable on third-party data. They are part of our database, but really making sure that like we are owning the data that our brokers and our researchers and our consultants in-house are harnessing and then kind of, overlaying that with third-party data. I think we're also trying to go beyond kind of just standard reporting of data. That's very easy to do. We can data dump all day long and it can kind of give you whiplash. It's so much. But how do you tell a story with it? And how do you make sure that it's convertible and meaningful to the clients that we're servicing? And I think at the end of the day, that's really where it comes down to the communication. So taking ownership and harnessing our own data and making sure that we are able to tell a story that can drive business decisions, not just reporting out hordes and hordes of data. So that's where our focus has been and will continue to be moving forward. And then layering that into technology solutions that help our clients make more data-driven and more efficient decisions in the long run.
Sure. Dare I ask about AI? Are there any AI initiatives?
There are. So I think we were the first commercial real estate firm, don't quote me on this, to launch our first kind of internal chat GPT internal system. And I was a little weary of it first, I'm not going to lie. It kind of scares me that I have a 10 and 13-year-old that can just go, chat GPT something and, not spend the hours that we all spent doing a homework assignment. But I've gotten over that and recognized there's good things about it. So yes, we have our first kind of closed system and it's tremendous. One thing it's just helping us do internally is mine all of our internal protocols and data. So now you can go into and say at JLL and ask it a question about certain information and it spits it out right away. It's incredible. And yes, just helping us be more concise with our communication. We talked about that earlier. I tend to be too verbose sometimes in my emails. And so I can kind of put my email in there and it can shorten it up really quickly. It's helped us. We're hosting a networking event coming up, and we had some ideas on questions we wanted to ask and kind of themes that we wanted to kind of project. And we threw them in there, and it gave us like 5 taglines for the event very quickly that people could kind of poke at and ultimately vote on. So I think we're just getting started on AI, but it's exciting to have seen JLL made the commitment because it's a heavy financial investment to kind of get it off the ground. So I think more to come on that. But JLL ChatGPT is definitely my friend these days.
That's really awesome. I think it helps with, like you said, communication efficiencies. It's just incredible what it can do. And I'm excited to see where it's going to lead us.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's going to touch all industries, not just corporate, commercial real estate and the corporate world. So yeah, more to come on that.
Yeah. So I'm sure our listeners are dying to know about culture, right? And how does culture play in the overall success of workforce strategies?
Yeah, that's a hot topic right now, even within JLL. And I would imagine most organizations is really defining what does culture mean. I think if you asked everyone in this room, we would all say something differently. But the reality is culture is more than just happy hours, free lunches, beer taps, bring your dog to work, right? Culture is some of the things we talked about earlier, feedback loops, skilling your people up, communication. And so JLL right now is really, doubling down on what is our definition of culture. We've always prided ourselves on a strong culture, but just recently we had a leadership meeting where we had an organizational psychologist that came in and kind of help facilitate a good conversation on this topic. And some of the things that were shared was culture is a 24/7 game. Culture is the little things that people do when others aren't watching, which I thought was interesting. And said differently, culture is not always the fun, easy things. It's the hard stuff. And so culture isn't the best thing as an organization's doing. Sometimes it's the areas that need the most improvement, or, said honestly, the worst behavior that a company tolerates is your culture. So that was really eye-opening to me, just as a leader outside of the workplace conversation. Is culture, I think, really goes hand in glove with workplace strategy. We have found that organizations that come to us that say, hey, we have a culture of transparency, trust, and engagement with our people, we just don't have the space. Those are projects that we jump in very quickly to, because leaders of those organizations have already kind of built a strong culture that's going to allow a successful workplace transformation process to happen. Said differently, you can build beautiful space with all the best amenities in the world, but if as an organization and as a leadership team, you haven't built that culture of trust, engagement, and transparency, people aren't going to come to the space. So you can see it kind of goes together. And I think moving forward, most organizations, including JLL, are and should be really focused on defining what your culture is, aligning on that within your leadership team. And then it's up to leaders to kind of produce an environment that breeds that culture, that the leadership team is talking about, and that your people ultimately want to be part of.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I wonder where you even find a corporate psychologist, right? That's really dialing into
this guy was amazing. His name was John Amici. He has got a tremendous background. Big, tall British guy from the UK, played basketball, had a stint in the NBA. So not what you would expect to get up and present as an organizational psychologist, but he was tremendous. So look him up. He taught us a lot just in a short 24 hours, and hadn't heard the idea of an organizational psychologist. I've heard of executive coaching and strategic consulting, but he was really insightful and helped drive some really productive conversations amongst 100 plus leaders across JLL in the U.S. It was awesome.
That's awesome. I'll have to check him out.
Yep.
All right, so emerging trends. How does JLL stay ahead of the curve when identifying just emerging trends, right? And market opportunities, potential disruptors. It seems like you're already at the forefront with technology, but what other components are there?
Well, I would say, we're constantly evaluating that, but I think it really starts with having a more diverse and balanced leadership team. That is how you uncover disruptors and stay ahead of the game and become cutting edge. And so I think that's one thing that we're focused on right now is making sure that we have the lived experience integrated into our leadership landscape. And so even my eyes have been opened on what that means because we've been so focused on just gender diversity, right? Having male and female leaders at the table and ethnic diversity at the same time. We're hearing more generational and age diversity, right? How do you make sure you've got, maybe that older, younger millennial at the table with the baby boomer at the same time, making strategic decisions about the business. But even I've heard recently of, lived experiences of a single income family versus a dual income family. Those lifestyles look very different as we're raising children and we're sharing commitments. Both have their pros and cons, but how do you make sure your leadership landscape reflects that? You can take that to another level of, single parent homes versus dual parent homes, right? Like I've been fortunate to grow up in a dual parent environment. I'm giving that to my children. I work with people that are single parents, either by choice or not by choice. And so I think that's what we're trying to do is making sure that we have a more balanced leadership landscape. Because if you do that, you're going to be able to stay cutting edge, get in front of the game, make sure that you can sense when there's disruptors in the business because you're thinking differently. You're challenging those in the room, and ultimately you're being more curious because you're learning from someone next to you. Again, doesn't look like you, but has a different lived experience and can bring a different approach to the business. So I think that's the best thing any company can do these days because the world is changing very quickly and there's always going to be someone trying to disrupt you. And you need to make sure you kind of have a well-rounded leadership team to make sure that they can kind of feel that and stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, I really appreciate that lived experience. That's a term that you don't necessarily hear, but it's very intentional, right? Because you can't walk in through someone else's shoes. And
Yes.
We don't know what someone else is going through. So having that diverse lived experience will paint a whole different picture.
Yeah, I mean, being a little vulnerable, like as a female who has a husband that works and two kids at home, like I can mentor a young female who has that profile all day long. Like that is my jam, right? But we know not only do we have work to do on the female front within our business, we don't have a lot of Black teammates within our brokerage business. That percentage is a lot lower than I think we want it to be. And so even recently, I reached out to a very prominent Black leader in our market, and I reached out to him. I was like, hey, I want to be a better mentor to some of the Black teammates that I have. That's just not a world that I live in. And he really appreciated it. I learned a lot from him. So I think being curious on kind of when you recognize you are coaching and developing people that don't have the same lived experience as you do, ask other people, ask how you can be a better mentor for someone that might have that experience. And I think the more that we do that as leaders, the better we're going to be able to kind of develop and communicate and grow a more diverse talent base.
Yeah, I really like that. Thank you for sharing that with us. So we've asked a lot of questions, but are there any questions that I didn't ask that I should have?
So this is a personal story, but if you were to ask me, hey, Kimarie, have you ever been given the opportunity to work from home or work remote, and how did that go? So I told this story a few times, but early pre-pandemic, this was almost 14 years ago because my oldest one will be 14. I was working for our senior leadership team in Dallas, and I was 8 months pregnant with Bruce. And my boss, now our CEO of brokerage across the Americas, came over to my desk and he was like, hey, when you get back from maternity leave, you are welcome to work from home on Fridays. And again, at the time, that was unheard of. Nobody worked from home. And I would tell that story to people over the past couple of years. And I said, How many times do you think I took him up on that and worked from home?
I don't know.
Zero.
I
never did. And some of the responses I get from people is like, oh, not everyone is as driven, as focused as you are. And I was like, I was 29 at the time. I didn't make a lot of money. I think I had like a senior associate title. And half the time when I walked into John's office, I left and didn't know what he was asking me to do. And I'd have to go back to my desk and talk and ask to other people. And so I just firmly believed he offered that to me, and it went in one ear and out the other. And I just was like, how am I going to continue to grow? And all I was looking for was like to go to the next level, not to be where I am today. I just didn't think that I could do that being away from the team 20% of the time. So I know I have a little commercial real estate bias in my view on return to office, but I truly believe being around people and your teammates, especially early on in your career, is the way you learn. So that's my fun fact. If you would have asked me how many days have I worked from home when offered, it would be 0 for that reason.
Wow. When you worked from home during the pandemic, was that challenging?
Very challenging. Very challenging. That is not my jam. I lost part of my soul and myself. And I was very excited to get back to the office June of 2020. And I was glad JLL made a commitment across the country to, in the right way, bring people back. Because, working from home is not my jam.
Yeah, it's not my jam either. I'm a people person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you miss so much. Those little morning chats around the coffee pot, right? Like those add value over time. And especially for young talent, that mentoring, it's so important to be around leaders and to watch people and learn from them. So
amen to all of that. Yeah. My other problem was my husband would tell you, I would roll out of bed and then like roll into my pajamas into the guest bedroom and start working all day and not wash my hair, not put makeup on, not put clothes on. And as a female, like that's a lot of work in the morning, but I feel like it's my uniform and it kind of sets my intention and my mindset for the day. So that is one thing that left unattended of not having to do that. I was like, oh, this is not good.
All right. So before we let you go, let's have a few fun questions. Mm-hmm. So one that I just thought of actually while you were speaking, you mentioned you're from Dallas, and there's some fantastic Dallas restaurants here in the Triangle now, but what do you prefer? Are you like more of a Torchy's person or more of a Perry's pork chop person?
So I have a lot of strong opinions on the Tex-Mex landscape, if you will, coming from Texas. Mexican food, Tex-Mex, however you want to kind of define it. We had it. And so when I moved here, I was like, ooh, I have not found a place that has homemade tortillas or really knows how to do queso. They call it like cheese dip. And I was like, oh, this is kind of a problem. But pleased to announce, like you said, over the past couple of years, we've acquired some of those restaurants. So Torchy's was a big deal when I came. I think we eat there on a weekly basis. My boys love it. And then Super Rica, I don't know if you've been there yet. It's out at Fenton. Okay. And so it's a great Tex-Mex place. Even I took my mom there. She's like, okay, this will do. So still missing some of the like really authentic Tex-Mex places that Texas has, but we're catching up here. And so anytime something that has Texas roots that comes here and opens up, we're the first ones to go there, and we probably overeat there on a continual basis.
I love that. So another fun question, and maybe you've already shared it. You did tell us you were a collegiate swimmer, but do you have any hidden talents?
Oh, hidden talents. I would say on a more serious level, a hidden talent. We've talked about it a little bit. I'm a huge advocate and champion of growing female talent, but I have 2 boys like you do. And so my eyes have been really opened I joke, like I advocate for female talent during the day. And then at night, I come home to my husband and my 2 boys that I need to cheerlead and support them too. So I do feel like I have gained a little bit of a hidden talent to see both perspectives. And I think that's why I'm so big on like more balanced leadership teams. When I go on a girls' trip with a bunch of my lady friends, like, you do not want us running an organization by ourselves, and vice versa. So I'm very big on like, how do we take the best of both worlds and kind of lead an organization and team. So I don't know if that's a hidden talent, but the ability to balance being a boy mom and a champion of your husband's ambitions, but also an advocate for female talent. is a little bit of a hidden talent, I guess, I will claim.
Yeah, I think it is a hidden talent. I mean, selfishly, right, I see it as a superpower. If you can survive being a mom of 2 boys, right, and still succeed at your day job, I mean, that's...
Well, and I've had friends ask me, they're like, oh my gosh, you're such an advocate for female talent. Don't you wish you had girls? And I've always wanted boys, and I would have had multiple other ones if I didn't have my career at JLL. But I was like, no, I really feel like my job is to raise boys that have the attributes that my husband does. And that is my contribution to growing female talent. So people are surprised by that. I'm like, nope, my job is to make sure that they are like their dad and can support women like my husband has supported me over the years.
Amen to that. 100% agree with you. All right. So last but not least, this podcast is called Constructing the Carolinas. So if you could see any one project be constructed here in North Carolina, and it could be anything, what would that be?
I wish we could have a major league sports stadium constructed downtown. I've seen what that has done to other markets. I know right now we only have the Hurricanes, and they're embarking on a redevelopment and renovation of PNC Arena, which is amazing. But yes, I would love to see another major league sports team come into this market and build an arena or a stadium in the core of the market and potentially downtown area where you can really build a vibrant entertainment district. Because I think what that does to a community on so many different levels, even if you're not a huge sports fan, what I have just seen in other communities, I think would be really awesome for Raleigh-Durham. So you never know, given we only have a hockey team, one day, we could explore an MLB team or an NBA team or an NFL team. So I think the rate at which this market's growing, it's not out of the question that some of those teams and different sports outside of hockey could expand here in the Triangle.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this market can certainly support it. And I think there's a movement, right, behind the scenes that's supporting MLB and some of the other teams. So fingers crossed.
Yes.
Hopefully one day we'll look back on this episode and say, remember when we were wishing? Now it's a reality.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and look forward to coming back and unpacking some of these topics a little further.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much to Kimarie Ankenbrand. Be sure to connect with her on LinkedIn and follow JLL at jll.com. Thank you for listening or watching Constructing the Carolinas. We'll be back again soon with a new episode, so be sure to press the follow button on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, and check out what Barnhill is doing to construct the Carolinas. You can find us at barnhillcontracting.com, and you could follow us on LinkedIn as well. This podcast is edited and produced by Earfluence. I'm Valerie Bono, and as we construct the Carolinas and as we build this podcast, I encourage you to keep building and growing as well. See you next time.